Hello, everybody. Good evening. Everybody awake up there in the top level? All right, I see a few hands. So today you're here to see Do the Math screening. You may also be here to see Elizabeth May or Adria Vasil, but for now you get to see me. I'm Darren Kaser. I'm with the Green Majority, which is on my shirt here, but you're kind of hiding it by my nice vest. What I wanted to take just 2 minutes to talk to you about before we get started here is why I am here. Why I am here is, aside from MC, is also just to talk to you very briefly about media. One of the issues with any environmental thing is public opinion. The court of public opinion rules a lot of what we do. That's how democracy works, ideally. Of course, that's in scare quotes. And one of the problems with that is that, unfortunately, one of the issues that is almost never talked about in the environment, but I think is absolutely critical, is the fact that most people get their news from newspapers. But newspapers are dying. Many of you may pay attention to environmental stories, but I don't know how many of you pay attention to what's happening in the industry of media. And unfortunately, what is happening in the industry of media is that traditional media is in its death throes. It's dying. Nobody's reading newspapers anymore. I really hope Now Magazine does just fine, but unfortunately, that's the truth. So a lot of alternative media has come up to develop it. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create our own environmental news network. I've started here in Toronto. We've already been doing environmental news radio programs since 2006 at CIUT 89.5 FM every Friday morning from 11 to noon. Thank you very much. I've also spent about 60 hours in the past 3 weeks working on my website, so please go there and send me a note saying it looks really great, because otherwise I might cry. The very important final thing, though, is one unfortunate note, which is that it's a reality of economics. And don't worry, don't fall asleep. I'm going to talk about economics for like 3 seconds. Economics means is that, unfortunately, newspapers and traditional media, because they're dying, don't get their money from you anymore. Where do you think they get their money from? Somebody call it out. Oh, somebody up there wins. I heard it first. Advertisers. Advertisers, guess who that is? ExxonMobil, Kraft. Right? Porter? At the risk, I promised them I'd keep this to 3 minutes, though, so we'll stop it there. You guys get the idea. This is not a big conspiracy. I'm really allergic to conspiracy theories. I think that simple economics does a much better job of explaining what's going on. And what that means is that if you guys aren't paying for newspapers, who is paying for newspapers? The advertisers, which means you don't need to have a conspiracy. You don't need a dark room with a bunch of men with cigars deciding what's going to be printed in the newspaper the next day. All you need is a smart editor to realize that they better not run a story about Nestle stealing water for drinking bottles from public resources if Nestle pays for all their advertising and pays for their existence, right? So that is where I will leave it, just with the idea that I'm here with a couple of my compatriots. The gentleman operating the camera there is Stefan Hostetter. He's with the Green Society campaign. He's going to be helping me videotape this today and put some of this out on the air. But really importantly, what I want you to think about is you're all here because you already think that this is an important issue. I really doubt you would have taken time out of your day if you didn't. What we need to do is convince everybody who's not here. There's a variety of really good ways to do that. I will leave you with the last thought that I also think that helping us spread our media message, an alternative to the corporate media, is a really good way to do that too. And that if you'd like to learn more, there's our cards are in all the bags that are going to be handed out. I will also be available. Stefan also has some cards as well. With that, I'm going to now introduce our first guest, who is a major sponsor for today, which is Now Magazine. I'm now introducing Alice Klein. Welcome to the stage, editor of Now Magazine.
Sorry, that's important. Oh, wow. It's great to be here. Isn't it great to be here? Has everybody munched and raffled and, you know, gotten the party on here? It's amazing, and it's a great pleasure on behalf of Now Magazine to welcome you, and it's been a great pleasure to be part of bringing people together. You know, obviously, environmental awareness is part of the DNA of Now Magazine. We just heard a little discussion about the corporate media, and we're very proudly not the corporate media. And yeah, and we will continue to not be the corporate media. And you know, some people think that that's some kind of political position, or that's, you know, like not objective. But actually, we think it's a natural-born reality that we're part of the environment. So, hey, let's wake up. So it's a wonderful thing to be together. We have so many exciting things to look forward to tonight, and including the. It's a great pleasure again for Now Magazine to be looking forward to some comments from our wonderful Ecoholic commentator, Adria Vasil, who is in the house, along with Elizabeth May on the panel. Fantastic. And so just on a personal note, wonderful to have the experience of the people who are driving the success of non-corporate media like ourselves, and driving the success of these amazing campaigns that we're going to get more familiar with as the evening goes by. So just to end with a big thank you. Thank you for coming, and thank you for being you, and thank you for all that you do.
All right, thank you very much, Alice. We're now going to, as well, I'm going to stay up here just so I don't have to do too much walking. I'm getting tired, I'm old. Stu and Monica from 350.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. It means a lot that you're all here, and I'm really excited that this event is going on. I'm Stu. I'm the president of Toronto 350. This is Monica, the creative director. And we've been sort of running around like a headless chicken, making this all come together. So thank you for coming out. Toronto 350 is a fairly small group of just local people, volunteers, that have all come together. We're trying to work to solve the climate crisis. We're a separate group that do our own thing. We're very entrepreneurial, and we just decide what we want to do at weekly planning meetings every week. We're connected to the 350.org mothership, which is an international charity or nonprofit that is working to solve the climate crisis also and build the climate movement. And that's what we're doing tonight. We're building the climate movement. So I'll pass on to Monica.
Okay, so one of the questions that we sometimes get asked is, why 350? What does it mean? And essentially, 350 is a key number when you do the math on climate change. So currently, our atmosphere is sitting at about 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So it really measures the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. And we're rising by 2 parts per million every single year at current emission rates. Scientists tell us that we need to lower this number to 350 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere in order to ensure the well-being of the planet, so to avoid triggering runaway climate change. So 350 is essentially, it represents climate safety, and it also represents a tangible benchmark that can steer us in the right direction and help us to mobilize efforts around lowering emissions and pursuing campaigns to mitigate climate change.
So at Toronto 350, we've had 2 major campaigns going on for the past year. The first of those is our fossil fuel divestment campaign that Monica will tell you about in a minute. And the other one is the campaign to stop the Line 9 pipeline. The Line 9 pipeline. Okay, you guys know about the Line 9 pipeline. I don't have to tell you much, but I'll give you the basics. The Line 9 pipeline is an oil pipeline that runs currently through, it's been running for about 40 years, so it's an old pipeline that goes through the Finch Hydro Corridor across the top of Toronto. Enbridge, the energy company, is attempting to reverse the flow of that pipeline, increase the pressure in the pipeline and the amount of things going through it, and change it to allow the tar sands diluted bitumen to flow through that. And diluted bitumen is not a nice substance. It's been described as hot liquid sandpaper. It's very corrosive, and the big spills that we've seen in the last few years have all been from old oil pipelines that have been converted into carrying diluted bitumen. They've ruptured, they've spilt. Massive areas have been polluted. It's affected not only the neighborhoods that have often had several square kilometers sometimes have got to evacuate, which could be crowded city blocks in Toronto. But not only that, it affects the drinking water for the entire city because it would flow down the waterways and into the lake. And so we could actually see real problems in the city of Toronto if our water is polluted like that. However, that's not why Toronto 350 is working on it. We're working to stop this pipeline because of climate change. Right now we have Stephen Harper, who is completely set on, thank you, yes, on destroying Alberta through mining the tar sands and getting as much of the oil out the ground as possible. And that oil is not good oil. It is very bad. It is very intensive in carbon emissions. The long and short of it is if we do take all of the oil out of the tar sands, it's game over for planet Earth. That's the words of James Hansen, the NASA scientist. And we've got to stop him. And one of the ways to stop the tar sands. One of the ways we do that is by making sure that the tar sands oil can't leave the tar sands and so can't make it to international markets. So we've got a campaign to stop that. We're working with a whole bunch of other groups around the city. This week is the National Energy Board's hearings about Line 9. And so we're trying to put as much pressure on them as possible to say, no, this is not a good idea for Ontario, for Toronto, or for Canada. There's a bunch of events going on this week. On Friday night, there's the Tar Sands Reality Check tour is going to be at Bloor United Church at 6 o'clock until 8 o'clock. So I'd invite you all out to that. And also on Sunday, there's going to be a massive rally. Saturday the 19th, there's going to be a massive rally down at the Metro Convention Center, which is on Front Street, 255 Front Street West. Be there at noon. We need as many people as possible. It's right outside where the hearings are going to be taking place, and we can stop Line 9.
All right. Thank you very much, Monica and Stu. Do you have more?
One more.
One more.
Tidbit, yeah. Just to go quickly, our second campaign, and you're going to be seeing a little bit more about this movement in the movie, is the campaign to get our public institutions to divest from fossil fuels. Yeah. So this is a campaign that we're undertaking like in collaboration with groups around the world. The movement has spread to over 350 campuses internationally. 100 major cities, as well as numerous religious institutions and arts and cultural organizations. So the main argument behind this campaign is that it's wrong to profit from wrecking the climate, and that institutions that operate for the public interest need to divest from fossil fuels. So Toronto 350, we've targeted here the University of Toronto, which is heavily invested in fossil fuels. We've been working on this campaign for just under a year. And in that time, we've collected about 1,000 community support signatures, including signatures from prominent U of T alum like David Miller, Tezpora Berman, Naomi Klein, among others. We've also for the past 8 months, been diligently working on composing a comprehensive brief that we can present to the university, arguing our case. And in it, we explain why divesting from fossil fuels is not only a moral imperative for the university, but is also financially feasible as well as a forward-thinking move for them to make. Where we're at the campaign right now, we've completed the brief, which is 190 pages. It has to be comprehensive because it's the only opportunity we have to present our case. It's all accessible online. What we need to do now, before we're allowed to present it to the university, is gather 300 signatures from the University of Toronto community. So that means alumni, students, staff, or faculty, saying that they've read and attested to the brief in full. So not a simple task, but if anybody in the audience is a member of the UT community or knows somebody who might be interested in considering endorsing the brief, as I said, it's online on our website, or you can talk to anybody in a blue shirt. That'd be great, yeah, waving. And also, if you're not a member of UT community, but you'd like to sign our general community support petition for the campaign, that's also on our website, and we have them lined up on the tables on both floors. The divestment movement was kicked off a year ago, when this tour, the Do the Math tour, was started. So we're going to see a documentation of that tour. Since that time, there's been a number of important victories. So around 6 colleges and universities in the United States have officially divested. 18 cities like Seattle, San Francisco, Santa Monica, Berkeley, Boulder, these cities have already pledged to divest. 13 religious institutions. Vancouver actually, just this week, a couple days ago, took important steps towards divestment. But we need a Canadian victory. So we need something like that to happen in Toronto and other major Canadian cities. And we're hoping to really ramp up the movement tonight with this event. So I think, yeah.
We're ready. We have one more thing, I think, before we go to the Bill McKibben video. But I want to tell a joke about having you there. Milan, who's the guy standing on the side here, was on my radio program talking about the divestment campaign. And afterwards, my co-host, who's Kevin Farmer, who's actually a former Green Party candidate, and the end of the story may tell you why he was not a successful candidate. was that he said, he's like, you know, I'm really a big fan of 350. I think they have a really good idea. He's like, but I have a problem with one thing. And I said, really? What was that? He's like, well, really, 350 is when you have a 50-50 chance with the climate. Really what we should be looking for is 280. To which I said, Kevin, relax. And when we get to 350, we can have this conversation. But I think that's a good lesson to
Then we'll
to sort of
change our
take.
name to 280.
Exactly. They're more than willing to change their name to 280. But I think it's something, just a lesson to take on as we go into this, is that there's a lot of information, there's a lot of facts, there's a lot of details. What you shouldn't be taking from this is to take all the notes home. We want to sort of agree that this is important and take in some useful information. But I think one of the things that I've been very, very impressed with when I've been working with 350 over these past few weeks is I've probably worked with over 100 student level groups at university. This is one of the most organized and effective teams of people that I've come across so far. I've never seen a group that's been able to put something like this together, especially in such a short time. So congratulations very much. And without further ado, we'll introduce the Bill McKibben video. So we have a short introduction by Bill McKibben. We'll be getting right down to the screening, so hold on to your hats. Here we go.
Enjoy the movie.
All right, I hope everybody enjoyed the screening. I know it was a heartwarming picture that made everybody feel warm and fuzzy inside. Here to improve the mood a little bit are two much smarter, more attractive, and interesting people than I. I am joined today by Leader of the Federal Green Party, Elizabeth May. Following her closely on the stairs is the writer of Ecoholic, Adria Vasil. So what we're going to be doing, just to keep everybody on point, is each of our amazing guests is going to be talking, giving a very brief presentation. Then we will have an opportunity for Q&A. The way that this is going to work, because everybody knows, but everybody's guilty of it, is that everyone's bad at asking questions when in a public setting. So what we're going to do to eliminate that is if you have a question for the Q&A section after this, which is going to be roughly 19 and a half minutes from this point right now, is you are going to tweet hashtag MATHTO, M-A-T-H-T-O. You will tweet your question. That will force you to keep it to 144 characters. You may not add two tweets together. That is not permitted. Okay? You'll be tweeting those questions, and if we don't get any good ones, then I'll ask them. All right? Then we will you can either try and find one of the 350 people on the side there, or perhaps borrow your neighbor's phone. We only have time, I'll just be honest with you right now, we only have time for about 2 or 3 questions of each guest if we're lucky. So if you want to ask further questions, you can always contact me afterwards, because I'm going to be arranging, I'm sure both of them will agree to it, separate interviews on the show at a later date as well. So don't worry, your question will get answered at some point. It may just be a year from now. Without further ado, Ms. Elizabeth May now has the floor. Please give her your attention.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. Thank you all for coming out tonight. The first thing I want to say is that if you want to ask me questions, you can email me at the website, either greenparty.ca or elizabethmaymp.ca. Responding to questions and continuing the conversation and building a movement is what this is about. I'm enormously moved by seeing the film. I hadn't had a chance to see it before. I love Bill McKibben. We've worked together for years now. And the movement he's building, which is very grassroots, and the work we did before I was in politics, some of you may know I was executive director of Sierra Club of Canada. I've been working on the climate issue for a very long time. And if this film had been made for a Canadian audience, and that's where I thought I'd start and fill in some of the blanks, I would start with 1988, and I would start in Toronto. I would start with the first global scientific conference on the climate issue, which was convened here, co-hosted by the Government of Canada and 2 UN agencies, United Nations Environment Program and the World Meteorological Organization. And it was at that gathering of scientists that their consensus statement, I mean, picture this, folks, this was a scientific conference opened by the Prime Minister of Canada. I know you don't like him, but it was Brian Mulroney, opened a scientific conference on the climate issue. And the consensus statement of the scientists there in June 1988 in Toronto started with this sentence: humanity is conducting an unintended, uncontrolled, globally pervasive experiment whose ultimate consequences could be second only to global nuclear war. Bill McKibben's absolutely right. If we'd started right there where we were with the information we had from the scientists, and when I worked in the Office of the Minister of Environment at that time, I had the great I should say, I don't know if I'd say a privilege, but certainly it was a good piece of luck that I learned my climate science before the bastards in industry had invented the idea of doubt, right? I learned my climate science from scientists who understood that you add greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, you're going to destabilize the atmosphere. It wasn't a debate. It wasn't something that we worried about whether they were right or wrong. We received this information exactly the same way as when the scientists told us if we didn't reduce sulfur dioxide, we would have lakes and rivers dying from acid rain. We received this information exactly the same way as when the scientists told us if we didn't get a global treaty to protect the ozone layer, which we did get in 1987 in Montreal, we would destroy the ozone layer and the UV radiation would destroy life on Earth. We responded to those threats. But those industries caved sooner. They didn't have the power and they didn't have the gall to organize globally as ExxonMobil, and you've seen their names up on the screen in this presentation. The fossil fuel industry, after the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, invented the idea of doubt in order to try to slow action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and the transition to renewable energy. The worst piece of luck that any Canadian who's watched the climate issue evolve, are slow, hesitant, stopping, stalling, finally ratifying Kyoto, finally getting a climate plan in 2005, it can't really be called luck, can it? But certainly the worst twist of fate was the election of Stephen Harper as governing at first a minority party and then a majority of the seats in the House of Commons. Stephen Harper, whom from his very earliest days in politics has never expressed concern about the climate issue. In fact, who described the Kyoto Protocol as a socialist scheme. We have moved from being a country that did good things in global negotiations, which is a piece that's missing from this, watching what was happening in global negotiations, watching when Canada could rescue negotiations, keep the world moving forward. Our own domestic action was never as good as our words, won't claim that. But we were present and we moved things forward in global negotiations. And since Stephen Harper's been Prime Minister, we've moved things backwards. My other comment, if this film had been made in Canada, would be relevant to media coverage, which Darren started us with. And that was all the 350.org actions in October 2009 in the lead up to the Copenhagen negotiations. Did you know that of all the countries on Earth, Canada had the most individual actions, over 500? And did you know that we had some of the largest gatherings of cities around the world were in Canada? And did you know that the CBC didn't cover it? The Globe and Mail didn't cover it. Our national media is complicit in the fossil fuel industry crimes because it simply doesn't want to be out of step from what the Harper administration is prepared to do, which is why this has to be a grassroots movement and why we have to reclaim the democratic space and why we have to insist that the opposition parties stop playing in this sort of demented sand patch of you want a job-killing carbon tax. No, I don't. You do. I'm in Parliament. I see it every day. We need to have the citizens of this country demand that this country stop being in the way of global action. Yes, help the divestment campaigns. Divest the holdings of universities, churches, and other institutions of fossil fuel investments. But we need, as citizens in a country that's on the wrong side of history, to get ourselves back to where we should be as a country that's defending our children's future.
And I think, Ms. May, that you've actually done something unprecedented, which is you're the first person ever to end before their asked time. That's great because that means she's giving you more Q&A time. So I won't take any more of it either. Adria Vasil.
Hey, everybody. Okay, after watching this, I don't know how many people in the audience were sitting and thinking, holy crap, I should really probably be doing more. Put up your hand if you had that feeling. And if you're feeling right about now like you do want to get more involved and you would like to contribute more to our global and collective reduction of our global carbon footprint and our individual carbon footprint, then there are really 4 tools for you to do that. And I mean, one is really just, these are all really broad. I mean, one is our power as citizens to affect change. And so I'm just here to first of all remind you to use your voices as voting citizens to remind our elected government and our elected representatives, MPs, MPPs, and councillors
that we expect more from them, that we expect them to represent us on climate change and to ask for more on climate change, and we are not seeing it. There are a lot of elections coming up, both municipally, federally, and provincially in the next year or two. So let's start gearing up and ratcheting up the pressure, please. And so I encourage you all to just, contact them, email, Twitter, Facebook, whatever it might be, and reach out. And also as citizens to, link arms with some groups that are actually here tonight, tabling in the back on the second floor. Come and meet them, greet them, and it's really the best way to amplify your power as an individual, as a citizen, is to join up with groups like these that are here tonight. And second tool in your toolkit is really your power as a community member to affect change. And it's something that was touched on in the film as well, in terms of divestment. So if you belong to university, even if it's not U of T, there are lots of other schools in this city, including Ryerson, George Brown, etc. If you are a member of a school that is not yet gearing up with a divestment campaign, then hey, why not get started? And same thing with a church group, as they mentioned in the movie. Any large organization that you belong to that has some kind of fund, some kind of pension going on, you can talk to them about divesting. And so I encourage you all to start that conversation. And of course, doing the Ecoholic column, I can't proceed without talking about the third tool in your toolkit, which is your power as a consumer to affect change and to influence the companies that you support and maybe don't support and maybe pretend to support to go greener. And so in this way, I encourage you all to, if there's a brand you like and you want them to get off fossil fuels, if you want them, A, to take petrochemicals out of their product, or if you want, them to reduce their carbon footprint, like Mountain Equipment Co-op, I think they have slashed their carbon footprint by 31% over the last 5 years. If you don't, if there's a jacket you're about to buy and the company doesn't have a carbon footprint policy, they don't have a policy on reducing their CO2 emissions, then I would lobby them and ask them and email them and ask them for change. You know what, they want our money. They are after our dollars, and this is where we have the power to kind of hold them by the, I was going to use a sexist imagery there, but just hold them by the scruff of the neck and say, look, you want our money, you got to work for it. You want our dollars, you got to work for it. And so you have to really be the voice here and say, jump through some loops if you want to get at my cash. And I think it's really great, again, to join forces with a larger organization like Forest Ethics in this area. Forest Ethics has been great at working the corporate angle and getting brands to just, get shamed into green action. And for the longest time, they're working on paper issues and forestry issues. But recently, over the last couple of years, they have so far convinced 19 major brands to move away from, or commit to moving away from using tar sands fuel in their transportation networks. And so far they've convinced, who is it, eBay, Walgreens in the US, Whole Foods, Columbia, Patagonia, etc., many brands to say that, to ask their transportation networks to move away from tar sands fuels. Now, several brands have been a bit more diplomatic about how they've phrased this. The Gap, for instance, has said, we are going to be asking our transportation network to choose fuels that are not high intensity or high carbon fuels. And we all know who the high carbon fuels are in the room. They're coming from our country, unfortunately. And so I encourage you all to join forces with this campaign. Right now, Forest Ethics is targeting PepsiCo and Coca-Cola as their next two targets. And even if you don't drink Coke, and even if you're not in the Pepsi Taste Test Challenge, deciding between one brand or the other, you pit them against each other and say, look, I want to keep drinking, Snapple, or I want to keep drinking whatever it might be, but I'm not going to do it unless you take the lead. We've really got to hold our brands to account, because ultimately, look, they are major purchases of fuel in the world, and maybe as individuals, it doesn't feel like, us no longer driving or whatever makes a difference, but when we get these big brands to change their entire fleet so they're no longer supporting tar sands fuel, that does have an impact. So the final fourth tool, I don't want to go on forever because I do want to leave room for questions, but the fourth tool in your toolkit is really just, your power as an individual to affect change and to use your own, I guess it's your willpower to reduce your own personal carbon footprint. I was asked today to talk about that, and there's really so many ways that you can do that. I mean, all the stuff that we know already, driving less, not driving at all, taking shorter showers, turning the lights off, all those things we know already. But I wanted to bring up an interesting stat, just to remind you about the impact that we as individuals and as households have on this nation's greenhouse gas footprint. Environment Canada, when they were still doing this kind of research, they put out some stats that said basically Canadian households account for 46% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. And you sit there going, really? How is that possible? Because I've seen what's happening in the tar sands, and it can't be on us as households. But the truth is as households, we have to connect the dots to the fuels that we bring into our home. We have to connect the dots to the products that we bring into our home. And so that might be, yes, the natural gas that's heating our showers and the natural gas that's heating our dishwasher or whatever it might be. It's funny, Canadians tend to think of natural gas as a clean, green fuel, and that's really great marketing because it does contribute very much to our national carbon footprint. But besides all the direct fuels that we're burning on the premises in our homes, like those, or like the car in your driveway or whatnot, there are a lot of indirect emissions that we are responsible for, really, when you look at the products that we buy and that we bring into our home. The second largest source of indirect emissions for households in Canada is actually food. And we are throwing out 30% of the food we buy. And when you look at that around the world, all that food waste accounts to enough greenhouse gases to actually be equivalent to, well, let's say China and the United States are the top 2 greenhouse gas emitters in the world. In third place, you could put food waste. That's how significant the greenhouse gas emissions are coming from, food waste all along the process, all along the way to throwing it out, including, the methane created when we throw it out. So encourage you all to, buy less, eat less meat, to eat lower on the food chain. And, I was surprised, though, when I was looking into some research that, the top biggest carbon sources in our diet were like beef, lamb, and then third place, cheese. I'm sorry, vegetarians, but even us, we can be guilty. Per kilogram, it's actually, quite significant, the amount of greenhouse gases that come out of these morsels of food that we put into our mouth. So I have a lot more here, but I do want to get to questions. But yeah, reducing the amount of food that we throw away, that so we're buying less every week and buying less stuff in general. I mean, we are outsourcing so many greenhouse gases, so much pollution to the countries from which we import. So we might say, well, Canada's not polluting as much as China, but we're buying all our shit from them, and we're giving them all our pollution. We're saying, well, it's not our pollution, but shit, we're buying their jeans, and we're buying their cars, and we're buying maybe not the cars yet, but the electronics, etc. And so we've got to take responsibility and connect the dots between us and the products we buy and the industries behind them, and the pollution that comes out of them. So we can divest not only our schools and institutions, but also our own lives, and go fossil free as much as we can in every area of our home, of our lives, and our workplaces, etc. So just a few tools to talk about tonight. We can get into it more in question period, but thanks for letting me blab on.
Okay. So we're going to do our Q&A section now. Hopefully one of the 350 people I've been trying to find if there's any hashtag questions. I'll get them if they have their questions for me, just to come and meet me at the side of the stage here quickly. While we're getting out the audience question part sorted out, though, I'm going to leave both of you with my one question, and okay. Ms. May, I'll ask you to answer it first, which was, I love hearing the comparison used with the World War II analogy. It's very, very frequently used. However, as you very clearly already pointed out, the tanks were rolling into Poland in 1988. Right. So when is it time to panic people?
Well, as you recall, that the action to respond to the threat of the Nazis was not one where government said, we'll do something as soon as we're sure that every single citizen is really on board with this. We want to wait and consider whether there's more money to be made by waiting to see how Poland does under Nazi rule. Actually, the U.S. waited quite a long time. They waited till Pearl Harbor. The reality is we knew enough to act in 1988. We knew more than enough to act in 1988. And the reason that, as Lester Brown's example in the film, that they were able to convert from making cars to making tanks in a very short period of time was because there was political leadership that didn't wait. Because Franklin Delano Roosevelt told the car makers, I want you to make tanks. And they said, sorry very much, but we're making cars. they passed a law making it illegal to make cars and telling them they had to make tanks. This is not an issue that's solved by saying, and my brother in Cape Breton often says this, you know, in the beginning of the Second World War, they didn't say, what are you willing to do about Poland, you average Canadian person? When are you going to make it clear that you care more about that than some other issue based on polling that we're doing? If we were waiting for polling, the polling already shows 80% of Canadians want action on the climate change. The difficulty we have had is that there is a complete failure of political leadership when we used to get lip service, and now the direction of the majority party is towards stopping climate action. It's not a question of having good lip service and no action, one step forward, two steps back. It's a situation of collusion with the enemy.
Just in case you think I'm not paying attention, I'm emailing my friends. I was just waiting to see if there was any questions on here yet. But just while I do the final check, while they get that sorted, do you want to answer the same one?
What's the hashtag?
The hashtag was MathTO. All right. In the meantime, though, I'll get you to answer the same question. Is there a point to panic people? When is it? Just because I feel, and the reason I was getting out with that question is, as Ms. May pointed out, this information's been around a long time. We have more confirmation, but the situation hasn't changed. We've only gained more information around it.
Yeah.
So
well, the situation has changed. It's much, much worse. We've lost 3 decades in which we could have taken action that could have actually avoided the loss of the polar ice caps. We are now in a situation where every major glacier on the planet is in recession. We are losing the Arctic ice. We are destabilizing the Antarctic ice shield. We're destabilizing the Greenland ice sheet. We are now locked into more extreme weather events that we weren't locked into in 1988 when the governments were given their clear warning. What we have now, and Bill McGibbon expressed it in the film very clearly, is it isn't possible any longer. It was when I first started working on this to say, if we do the following things, we can avoid climate crisis. Now what we have to say is, if we do the following things, we can avoid climate crisis wiping out civilization. Frankly, I think that's more than enough reason to act. I don't ever recommend panic, because no one makes good decisions when they're panicked. But it is a complete and utter failure of political leadership to think that this issue isn't as important as goodness only knows what, the Canada-China Investment Treaty. I mean, what are the issues that we see being taken up by our government and our parliament? Mandatory minimums for 6 pot plants. Where the hell are the priorities for this country?
So I have, I was able to throw one of them out, and it's actually a good follow-up to what you were just saying. So one of the, Yasmin is asking, and it's something I was going to ask anyway, so thank you, Yasmin. Is electoral reform, representational voting stopping us from climate action? So what I was going to ask, which is very much the same question, which was, given how much of a stranglehold on our democracy the current Prime Minister has, is there a way to solve the environment problem without solving our democracy first?
Well, they're so intertwined, as you say. My friend John Deverell, who happens to be the Green Party candidate at Toronto Centre, was a founder of Fair Vote Canada, and we will both agree that the current voting system, which is the only system in a democracy that could have the perverse result that 39% of the 60% of Canadians who voted can elect a majority parliament. And it is the case that at the moment, and I've been doing cross-country tour talking about democracy, because Canada is losing our democracy. We actually effectively live under a dictatorship, which is replaced every few years by election. That's not an effective, healthy democracy. So I'm hoping the movement that's created here can take that on. But we can't afford, we have to do both at the same time. We have to work for electoral reform. We have to try to get rid of first past the post. But they can't be sequential, right? The climate crisis is a closing window of opportunity to take the action we need. And we should be able to address it effectively while we're also fighting to get the voting system changed. But we can't wait to fight the climate battle till we have a new voting system, because there's no time left. That's the problem.
So somebody else wants to know, and perhaps we can go to Adria directly for this one, but they want to know what specifically can individuals do to fight pipelines? It seems to be a disparate set of actions. So how can we connect those two?
Well, I mean, there's so many levels. Of course, you can actually show up to the protests that are, specifically designed to signal the government that we do not want these pipelines. And
for instance, this Saturday.
Exactly, this Saturday. And sorry, am I too close to the mic? And here in Toronto, we have a lot of opportunity to there's a fight close to home with Line 9 and the reversal of Line 9 so that we have tar sands fuel soon coming through the city as opposed to less corrosive fuel that we still don't particularly love having coming through here. But so there's a fight happening right here on our turf, and I think it's important to get involved with that one. And, pardon me, our turf, Toronto turf, the GTA turf. Absolutely. Yes, no, and I just mean locally here in Toronto. I mean, obviously, pipeline issues across the Canada. Good point. Support Indigenous people, and you support this issue. Yeah, 100%. Indigenous people are really at the fore of these issues, and because of that, the only reason that pipelines have been so resisted on the West Coast is so much because of the Indigenous population standing up against it. And you've seen it. I mean, you're involved in it out West and have seen it with your own eyes.
It's everybody out West. I mean, we recognize that we are on First Nations territory. We work very closely with the numbers of First Nations all along the pipeline route for the one that Enbridge is proposing that would run from northern Alberta. It's a twinned pipeline, by the way. It would run northern Alberta to Kitimat, and it would also run from Kitimat to northern Alberta because they have to buy this stuff. We haven't had a lot of attention on this diluent that you mix with the bitumen because bitumen doesn't flow. It's like peanut butter. Even after putting in 4 barrels of water to each barrel of oil, and even after all the electricity, all the energy and natural gas burnt to take this stuff out of the ground and try to convert it into something that looks like fuel, it still doesn't look like fuel unless you upgrade it in northern Alberta, and then it's synthetic crude, and then you process it there, and then you've got a petroleum product. But because the Koch brothers have underutilized refineries that can handle bitumen and diluent on the Gulf of Mexico coast, that's why they want Keystone. It's for the convenience of the Koch brothers. If you actually look at what you want to put in the pipelines, our position is simple as Green Party. No pipeline going in any direction, north, east, south, or west, should have bitumen mixed with diluent. Now, the one they want to bring to Kitimat starts with tankers full of diluent, which, by the way, is a petrochemical distillant, basically from natural gas, a naphtha, that they mix with benzene and they mix with butane. And it's not a specific scientific term. It's whatever you want to call it. They call it diluent. And they're going to buy it from the Middle East. That's their evidence before the National Energy Board. And bring it up in super tankers to Kitimat to put it in the pipeline that runs north and east to Alberta to mix it with the bitumen to send it back across the same terrain, which is pristine and remote, and they'll never be able to handle a pipeline spill if there is one there. So what's happened in British Columbia is we have this remarkable amount of social cohesion. Yes, First Nations in the front line, but the organization of BC municipalities and the BC government and anybody you want to talk to, and my constituents whom I work for, the voters of Saanich Gulf Islands, make it very clear in every town hall meeting I hold, my job is to make sure they don't build that pipeline and there will never be a super tanker full of bitumen and diluent up and down the BC coastline. My job is clear.
And I think we need to build up the same momentum here in Ontario because, we need to be putting pressure on Kathleen Wynne. She, has expressed sympathy around the pipeline issue here, but at the same time, we just need to build up more momentum and ratchet up the pressure on her and make sure that she knows that the Ontario public is against this. And so I encourage you all to, contact your MPP here so that we get the same kind of momentum going here as they have, and the same amount of constituents, pushing here as they are out west.
But just a bit of proportion, too, because we're talking about the ecological footprint of living in Ontario. We still have coal-fired power plants, although the Liberal government under Dalton McGuinty provincially committed to shutting them down. That's not a small thing. That's a big thing. The coal-fired power for the province of Alberta still exceeds the greenhouse gases coming from the oil sands. Coal-fired power for electricity should be banned globally. It is completely unacceptable in this day and age that we're burning coal for electricity, and yet we are in Alberta, in Ontario, in Saskatchewan, in Nova Scotia, in New Brunswick. So if we're going to get to a really good climate policy, we have to pay attention to electricity. And where a provincial government does the right thing, even though I'd love them to be replaced by Mike Schreiner and the Green Party of Ontario, give credit where credit's due. Yeah. We got to give credit where credit's due.
I'm actually going to slightly rephrase Michael's question, but thank you for your question, Michael. I'm going to slightly rephrase it to something even more pithy, which is that it's something we discussed on my radio show recently, actually, with Stefan who's up there, which was, can you really call yourself an environmentalist if you are not vegan? And for fairness, in full fairness, I'm not. So just put that in context. I'm not baiting them.
So neither's David Suzuki. I think it's a moot point. The reality is we don't want to be fighting with each other over who is purer than whom. Anybody in the climate movement, anyone in the climate movement willing to fight politically to protect our future is on the right side of this battle. And I'm vegetarian. I apologize for not being vegan. My friend Georges Larac, who's running right now in Bourassa to win a seat in Parliament, he is vegan, and he never ceases to point out to me that I would be a better person, and I've seen him try to point it out to David Suzuki, which is an interesting argument. If you can picture Georges Larac looming over David Suzuki, explain to David why he should not be eating meat or fish. It's true that meat consumption is a part of the problem, but if we ignore the carbon footprint of our fossil fuel addictions, which is why all these issues are so critical, if we weren't transporting our foods with fossil fuels, if we weren't dependent on them like an addicted junkie, we would be able to be talking about solar and wind and geothermal and district energy and tidal power and all those things that will mean we no longer need fossil fuels. But we have to start the process of getting off them. And so forgive me, whoever asked the question. Yes, David Suzuki is an environmentalist. I'm going to go out on a limb on that.
Another question from the audience is Tim. Tim is wondering if you have divested your personal investments and assets from fossil fuels.
I have a very limited RRSP because I've never earned any money, and I made sure it was in an ethical investment fund with no fossil fuels. So the answer is no, I haven't divested because no, I never was beating my wife. I never had any investments in fossil fuels.
I think that's sort of a ditto on my part. I wish I could say that I had invested in anything the last couple of years, but I'm financially sort of illiterate, and I've got to get on that. But yeah, anyone out there can help me with some investing.
It's very important. If you have an RRSP with any of the major commercial banks in this country, you're invested in fossil fuels.
That's right. Yeah.
I had to go outside of commercial banks to find an ethical investment fund when I opened an RRSP.
But keep in mind also that most of the ethical investment funds in the country are still investing in the tar sands, really. I mean, they're investing...
No, I made sure the one I was investing in did not include tar sands companies. So you can find them, but it's not
They
that
exist.
easy.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, there'll still be some fossil fuel companies that they tend to be natural gas and so on, and they tend to pick the best in sector. But yes, you can search and look, and I think there are even some sustainable investment guys in the audience here tonight who I'm sure would let you pick their brains.
By the way, is anyone in the room here? I know some Torontonians went down for that big rally at Keystone, and some who got arrested, including my friend Adriana McNuttahamu. I'm just wondering, anybody in the audience here that got arrested in the demo we saw in the film? Because I just wanted to thank you if you're here. No. There were quite a few Torontonians who went down for that, so sorry.
No, not at all. Unfortunately, good thing I can project because my mic's off. There we go. All right, unfortunately, we only have a minute or two left. So what I wanted to ask as sort of a final question, then I'll sort of give you a hand signal when we have to wrap it up real quick, but hopefully we can get to both of you on our final Q&A for this section is, I'm just blanking on the word now all of a sudden, I'm sorry. Fossil fuel subsidies.
Yeah.
Seems like the biggest no-brainer on the planet. How has it not been done yet?
Let me just go to something I've wanted to talk about earlier. On the screen you saw, I think it was when Naomi Klein was talking about the three really conservative reports that should give us pause. One of them she pointed to is the International Energy Agency. The International Energy Agency has identified two things we really must do. But let me tell you what they found in their last report, and then I'll tell you the two things because it's directly on your point. This is critical information because I find Joe Oliver, as Minister of Natural Resources, quite often quotes the International Energy Agency, having cherry-picked one line from their report saying, we're going to be relying on fossil fuels for some time into the century. And I go to him, I take it out of the Library of Parliament frequently because it's a really expensive report I haven't been able to buy, but it's a couple hundred pages long. And I walk across the center of Center Block to his desk and say, Joe, look, this is the report you were quoting from. Read this line. This is the important part. Because what it says there is, of all the known reserves of fossil fuels that we know about on the planet right now, we must ensure that 2/3 of them remain in the ground until at least the middle of this century. That is to say, only 1/3 of known reserves of fossil fuels can be consumed before 2050, or we will go way past the 2 degrees mark, And the 2 degrees mark is not a margin of safety. On that, I'll agree with the young Green Party candidate, or Green Party candidate you mentioned. 280 is much safer than 350. But the reality of the International Energy Agency warning us that 2/3 of all known reserves of fossil fuels must stay in the ground should be something that people talk about in Parliament, and we don't. The other thing I'll say is that the International Energy Agency counted up all the global subsidies. $300 billion in subsidies to fossil fuels in, I think it was 2010, the last year for which I can remember their records, and $30 billion total for renewable energy. How often do you hear the right-wing media attacking solar and wind and saying, oh, those renewables are not real, they need subsidies? $300 billion in fossil fuel subsidies, $30 billion in renewables globally, and in Canada we continue to subsidize the companies that operate in the oil sands. We continue to subsidize. There'll be no exploration in the Arctic, I can promise you, without massive subsidies to the oil companies, because the oil companies themselves are saying it's too dangerous, and if there's an accident they can't handle it. So any exploration and any activity in drilling in the Arctic is subsidized. Absolutely everything about what's going on right now is that the governments are responding to one set of power brokers, and they are the fossil fuel lobby, and we have got to make, that's again, if we don't resurrect democracy and make it clear we don't live in an oligarchy, we're in a lot of trouble.
Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have to end our Q&A right there for this section. Thank you very much. I do have a couple announcements as we're getting ready to get out here, but why don't we give them a final round of applause before they go. Thank you very, very much.
We need your help. Get involved in this movement. Help350.org. Help any local group you can. Don't leave here tonight without promising yourself you're going to do more than you were doing when you came in the door. Thank you. You can